Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. And thank you for signing up and attending to this webinar hosted by the International Comparative Legal Guide Series in partnership with the Association of Governance, Risk and Compliance. My name is Ben Lawless, and I'm the publisher of the ICLG Cybersecurity Laws and Regulations Guide. Firstly, I would like to say that we appreciate your attendance as we begin an hour-long session around current trends in international cybersecurity law. It goes without saying that there's, of course, a lot to go through from both topical and geographical aspects, but our panel will do their very best and are very excited to provide some high-class insights and thoughts around the topic. We welcome contributions from you in the audience. Our platform is able to take questions through the chat box and order Q&A function, which will be at the bottom of your screen. So please do feel free to comment and ask questions today. Just so you're aware, today's session is being recorded and will be available publicly in the coming week online and to download. Now, before handing over to the panel, just a couple of points to run through briefly. Firstly, ICLG is proud to have launched just 2 months ago our 7th edition of our International Comparative Legal Guide to Cybersecurity Laws and Regulations, led by one of our panelists joining us today, Edward McNicholas. Edward is partner at the law firms Ropes & Gray, based in Washington. The ICLG cybersecurity publication has insights into 21 jurisdictions and takes deep dives into topics around cybercrime, corporate governance, and insurance. And we'll be providing everyone in attendance an opportunity to download the 2024 publication on a complimentary basis after this webinar. So do keep your eyes open for that communication. Secondly, I'd just like to thank our partner, the Association of Governance, Risk and Compliance. They're a brilliant organization supporting the GRC community through knowledge exchange, networking, and idea incubation. The programs that the AGRC run are raising standards of ethics and integrity in the world of compliance, and they're boosting the industry's knowledge and understanding of best practice, professional development, and new technologies. So if you've not seen much about the AGRC, I'd urge you to have a look at their website, agrc.org, after this webinar, and reach out to myself or Mateo for more information. And that brings me on nicely to welcome Mateo, a global manager at the AGRC, who is our moderator today. He'll do the formal introductions of the panel and move the discussion forwards. So, ladies and gentlemen, please do enjoy the session. Good luck to the panel. Mateo, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ben, for the brilliant introduction. I'm very excited to be here with both Colleen and Ed to discuss, what to look out for in cybersecurity in 2024 and beyond. As Ben mentioned, please feel free to submit your questions either via the chat or in the Q&A section, and I'll try to work those questions in as we answer the 7 questions that we have laid out for the session today, or I will save those for the end when we have 10 or 15 minutes to kind of cover those extra questions. So, before getting started, I would like to allow both Colleen and Ed to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about who they are, what is their interest in cybersecurity, their expertise, experiences, etc. So, Colleen, you want to give us a brief intro, please?
Certainly. And first, may I say thank you for having me. It's a wonderful opportunity to talk about these issues in a really exciting time. I'm a partner in the privacy and cybersecurity practice in Sidley's Washington, D.C. office, and I'm a data lawyer. The goal of my practice is really mitigation of digital risk. I try to approach that in a real practical way and frankly with optimism for the opportunities of technology. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Colleen. And optimism is always good. That's a good trait to actually carry in your life, both professionally and personally, I guess. Ed, brief introduction, please.
Sure. Ed McNicholas, security practice over at Ropes & Gray. I started off having the great pleasure of working with Colleen a few years ago over at Sidley, and then moved over to Ropes about 5 years ago. I've been in the area for about 20 years or so. It's amazing how young I am. Despite that, but I teach cybersecurity law over at GW Law School. I also have worked on just many of the largest breaches. Most recently, representing the CEO of SolarWinds, and trying to successfully removing him from the SEC case that the company is still under. But it's quite an interesting time here in DC, and look forward to discussing with you and my dear friend Colleen.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you very much for that introduction. So we have 7 questions here. Let's get started with these. These should take us about 45 minutes. And as mentioned again to everyone listening in, please feel free to submit your questions and we'll tackle those too. There's a technology that is in everyone's mind, artificial intelligence, of course. So let's start with AI. Let's get that out of the way. So the question is, I'm going to pose this to Colleen first, and then Ed can comment on this. But, the question is, how will advancements in artificial intelligence impact cybersecurity strategies in 2024? And what role do they play in defending against evolving threats? Colleen?
Certainly. So, I think this really came out in President Biden's AI executive order, that AI is an enormous key issue with respect to cybersecurity and national security, as it is important to our defense, but it is also a key factor in risk, because AI can power threat actor tactics. In fact, it is powering threat actor tactics, and it is magnifying cybersecurity risk, but it can magnify defenses as well. And to that point, it is playing a key part in magnifying cybersecurity tools. That is something that is not new. It has been being deployed in market available products for cybersecurity monitoring and detection tools, but also cybersecurity kind of policy and compliance products that help automate a lot of the work of the information security department, that help bring things up a level. And in addition to that, something that is a key point of cybersecurity risk relates to software development, secure coding, software lifecycle development. This is also something that President Biden has been very focused on with respect to the National Cybersecurity Strategy. When you read the National Cybersecurity Strategy issued last spring, you see this is a key theme coming out, and AI is helping power secure coding as well. So lots of opportunity to deploy AI in a way that levels us up, helps make us safer, which is really important because at the same time, AI does increase cybersecurity risk.
Thank you, Colleen. Ed, your take on this?
Yeah. AI in 2024 for the attacker seems to be one of those things that everyone's talking about and few people are doing. Yes, it might help some attackers write better phishing emails, and it might help some attackers write slightly better code. But frankly, ransomware as a service is already here. It's already been here. They don't need to write their own code. And so I don't think it's going to give the hackers much of a new advantage. Colleen is absolutely right in that it's been deployed for machine learning. But we data breach and get notices out to people faster. Coming attraction, I think, will be hugely significant in 2026, 2027. It is something we need to prepare for. And when we add quantum computing on top of AI, which is maybe 3 to 5 years off, I think we're going to have just a phenomenal phenomenal revolution in cyber.
Okay, thank you, Ed. For everyone listening, Ed is also stuck in traffic. He's in his car, so we might have a little bit of a break up there with the signal. So bear with us. Unfortunately, you know, these things happen.
Oh,
So
sorry.
it's all right, no problem. Moving on to the next question. This one, Ed can get us started with this one. But the question is, you know, what emerging technologies or tools are expected to be the game changers in cybersecurity for the coming year, and how can businesses leverage them for enhanced protection? Some tips out there on what you know, what tools or, you know, technologies are available or are going to become available?
I think the technologies that will be really transformative are that the ability to spot phishing email is greatly enhanced. We still have the big three. We have ransomware, business email compromise, phishing, insider attacks. And I think phishing attacks with things that are able to spot phishing attacks coming in, better training, and then better detection. The technologies for data loss prevention are getting much better. So if you are locking down your email with multi-factor authentication, using DLP to detect data going out, hopefully blocking it, you should be able to really up your game in terms of protecting your data within a company. We see now that a lot of the phishing attacks that happen are because there's been a breakdown in one of those technologies. The insider risk, harder. DLP should help with that. The ransomware risk, a lot of that, frankly, goes to the international piece of this, and whether or not we can stop or at least deter the international issues that are associated with ransomware gangs.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ed. Colleen, anything else to add to the, you know, that question?
Yeah. Well, first, I completely agree with what Ed just said. Both those technologies being very helpful and some of the challenges on the geopolitical drivers of ransomware being quite a challenge. I might add that there is a lot of compliance-focused software that automates cybersecurity day-to-day functions that help make processes more consistent and routine and faster. Identity access management software, patch management tools, secure software lifecycle development management software, asset management tracking software. These are things that for information security and information technology departments for prior years used to be largely manual processes, sometimes memorialized, oftentimes memorialized in policies, maybe not always. And when you have those kind of manual processes, that means it could be inconsistent, and that creates risk. So when you have means to automate them, that can help close those risks, help remove some of the human factor, make things more routine, and that helps elevate the entire process if you can make things more consistent. So I think those emerging technologies, I don't know if I want to call them sort of cybersecurity compliance tools, but they're just more tools, you know, in the toolbox for information security departments, and they're being adopted, you know, more frequently. I think, you know, especially identity access management software. You know, 10 years ago, not many people had it. Now, you know, a lot of companies have these things in place. I think the next level are, you know, the softwares that help you track processes such as SSLD. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that being viewed as really worthy investments.
Thank you. But plenty of food for thought, I think, there for IT teams and cybersecurity teams in terms of what technologies to embrace moving forward. Next up, let's look at in terms of cyber attacks. The question is, and Colleen, you can get us started with this one. With increasing sophistication of cyber attacks, what key trends do you foresee in terms of threat vectors, and how can organizations adapt their defense mechanisms accordingly?
Yeah. Well, I think Ed talked about the big three before.
Yep.
I think, they're still there. Those big three are still the big three. And of course, though, they're just continuing to change tactics. So business email compromises, they've been the thing for well over a decade. What's changing is, now there's more ways where they're attempting and in some cases being successful at getting around MFA. So we're still seeing business email compromises, even sometimes for companies that have MFA deployed. So, the basic playbook doesn't change necessarily, even though they're changing some tactics and becoming more sophisticated. However, I would add to that third-party risks, all those same tactics, but your third-party risk, your supply chain risk is still a necessary focus for cyber risk management. And there's a flavor of that I think people are, over the past few years, more and more rightfully focused on, which is software vulnerability risk management, which is a flavor of third-party risk. And it's harder. It's harder to stay on top of it because it requires a lot of threat intelligence, more sophisticated vulnerability and patch management programs, and because companies have a lot of third-party software in their environments. And sometimes it can be a real challenge just to know your technology. It's a challenge, particularly if you don't have really tight controls on what your people can use. And so this is sort of a multifaceted problem. What are we using? Do we know everything we're using? Then are we staying on top of potential vulnerabilities in the software and hardware that we are using? And then have we figured out whether we or the providers of the software or the hardware responsible for vulnerability management patching, does it get automatically pushed? Do we have to do it? And when? How are we going to schedule that? Are there break fix issues? It's a large challenge. And the visibility into the component parts of software is a real recognized challenge. And to that point, industry over the past few years has been really focused on how to give companies better tools for that visibility challenge. And in the wake of some pretty wide industry hitting sort of software vulnerability issues that happened over the holidays a couple of years ago, SBOMs, software bill of materials, have been receiving a lot of attention. They're trying to develop these, what I'll call sort of nutrition labels for software, so that people who buy and procure these software can really understand what the component parts are, because sometimes the component parts of the software will in turn then potentially have its own vulnerabilities that need to be managed, need to be patched. And that visibility, again, is a challenge if you don't necessarily know what the component parts are. And someone's got to keep track of it within an organization. So vulnerability management it's a component of third-party risk. When you think about it's a very complex problem, and it is never one and done, right? And so it requires a lot of attention and risk management on an ongoing basis.
Thank you, Colleen. Ed, anything to add to Colleen's very thorough answer?
I would just add 2 points. One, I think that we could see coming up on Super Bowl Sunday here. I was taken last week by the great Taylor Swift AI controversy.
Right.
And I think we're going to see some more movement on the protection of individuals, protection of corporate executives, entertainment figures, children, of cybersecurity law so far. And I think protection of individuals is coming as part of this. One interesting piece of that is that ransomware gangs, in order to get corporate attention and make their ransomware demands, have been going after executives. Getting the CEO's cell phone, home phone, contacting them, saying, "We know where your children go to school." Now, maybe they're sitting over in Russia, and so we're not actually going to do anything, but it'll get any parents' attention. And so that sort of thing, and making sure that individuals are also protected in cybersecurity, I think that's a new and particularly nasty vulnerability that we're going to see coming up. And the other vulnerability I think we're going to see is the vulnerability that companies have in organizational measures. It's always been about technical and organizational measures in terms of cybersecurity, and the organizational measures have frequently not included the C-suite. And in part, this might be because the lawyers or the CEO said, "Oh, that's something for the technologists to deal with. This is something for the CIO or the CISO to deal with." And now we're seeing a vulnerability if there's not appropriate corporate governance. And this is a vulnerability to attacks because companies cannot respond nimbly. The Securities and Exchange Commission, individuals, like they've gone after the CISO of SolarWinds. And that, I think, is a new piece of vulnerability to the regulators. At the end of the day, I think the hackers are still scarier than the regulators, but I don't want the regulators to take that as a challenge.
Right. Excellent. Thank you for that, Ed. Moving now, following COVID-19 and what that has meant to the rise in remote work. The question is, and Ed can get us started with this one. As remote work becomes more prevalent, what specific cybersecurity challenges are likely to arise in 2024, and what measures should companies prioritize to secure the distributed workforce? Ed?
Well, I think the biggest problem we've seen with remote work during COVID and beyond is the scale of the attack surface. That we've seen a lot more people dealing with corporate information on a wide variety of systems, and we've seen home systems and potential vulnerabilities in those home systems become much more significant. As workers work remotely, for instance, we saw in the financial services industry, people kind of naturally started using more and more of captured. The SEC has made very clear that yes, the corporate information was on personal devices. And even though everyone has policies saying not to, if people are working from home, it's much easier to start using a blend of corporate and personal technology, even though the personal technology might not be nearly as well defended. And so coming up with solutions that, for instance, containerize email on smartphones and have text messaging that is also maintained in secure ways, that we have to adapt to these new forms. And I think that's the real challenge of remote work, is as people are sitting at home, are even doing webinars from a car because I got stuck in traffic.
Right. That makes sense. Colleen, anything to add on the remote work front?
Yeah, I'm gonna underscore what Ed just said there. Shadow tech is a risk. It's a risk for all of the things we were just saying: data leakage, asset management, vulnerability management. Shadow tech is an issue, and regulators are paying attention because it can, as the SEC has said and started looking at with their enforcement muscles, potentially violate regulatory obligations. And then the other point is, when people are working remotely, they might be more susceptible to some of these human attacks, human-focused attacks, the phishing, the more sophisticated attacks for business email compromises that look to trick a remote workforce and circumvent MFA. Some of these, potential deep fake attacks, which are getting more and more sophisticated. And when you have a workforce that is not physically present together, it increases the risks that people can't just walk to the next office and validate something, much more easily. And so how do you counter that risk? I think the emphasis there again is training and frequently communicating, and to give a nod to the association of governance, risk, and compliance. Governance comes first, and it's because governance helps lead to creating a culture, compliance, a culture of awareness of risk. And that helps counterbalance some of these inherent risks of an increasingly remote workforce.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, Colleen, I
Go ahead, Ed.
was just thinking that there is a perfect example of that we came across, where it was a company accountant, and they got an email saying, well, it's the end of the year, so we have to close your bank account for audit. And the junior closed the bank account for audit, and we have to change our bank accounts for audit. Now, if that junior person had walked down the hallway and talked to someone who's been through an audit, they'd easily find out, wait, you don't have to close your bank account for an audit. You don't have to change your bank account. This is absurd. They're clearly lying to you. But it was a 20-year-old at home, not able to walk down the hallway, not wanting to look like they didn't understand audit procedure. And so they changed the bank account. Yes, that vulnerability is very real.
There you go. So it's always good to double check with anyone, even if you're working from home or from a beach in Cyprus, as I am right now. Okay, thanks for that. Now let's look at cloud security. And Colleen, you can get us started with this one. In the realm of cloud security, what are the critical considerations and best practices for organizations migrating or expanding their operations to cloud environments in the upcoming year?
Yeah. So, cloud is another one of those great opportunities to enhance cybersecurity, because cloud helps manage risk at scale, including one of those things we were just talking about with patch management. When you receive certain services, via cloud services, a cloud-based provider can do vulnerability management, for its customers, and push patches, kind of automatically and at scale, which can really help, mitigate risk at, across the industry. And that's really great, frankly, for our nation. But the key thing is to pay attention to the details of the services. And this is where companies can potentially get into trouble if they don't fully understand the services that they receive or don't receive. And so it's important to understand whose obligation it is to identify and push patches. It may be that the terms of your contract are that you have to request, or that someone has to approve, or there's some place where you have to go into a queue and check things. It's also possible that some cloud services, depending on what kind of cloud service you're receiving, there's a wide variety there, doesn't have sort of cybersecurity support or information security related support as part of the services. And people sometimes assume it does. And again, that can cause risk. So a key point here is to make sure you understand the range of services you're receiving, and not to make assumptions based on potentially high-level language in a description or a contract. Really understand whose obligation it is to do what with respect to these services.
Thanks, Colleen. Ed, any other tips in terms of cloud security?
I would just be a savvy consumer and make sure you understand what you are or not getting, and that cloud also has its own unique vulnerabilities. You are, in effect, creating a giant honeypot of your data by putting it all up in the cloud. And frequently, we will see very nasty breaches where people have then lost their credentials or had their credentials compromised. And so you've taken all your data, put it up in a cloud provider, and you have a set of credentials to that information. And if people lose those credentials or have those credentials compromised, you can have an incredibly complicated breach. The other piece of it is that the cloud industry itself has not been a paragon of transparency about their own vulnerabilities. There have been significant cloud attacks. Sometimes when attackers get into the cloud, they will frequently, blame their clients and say, well, it wasn't properly secure. Rarely do you get to have the level of insight into the forensics about whether the cloud provider also made mistakes. And that is a significant piece of this, that cloud providers have a vested interest in selling the security and safety of the cloud. And this is something that is difficult to assess on the consumer side of things, because if cloud providers have a breach, and if you look up cloud breaches on the internet, you'll see that sometimes they get quite nasty and wind up seizing up large amounts of data. And if people are relying upon the cloud, both of their operational and backup information, a company can be quite severely impacted by a breach of their cloud resources.
Thank you. Excellent. Again, a reminder to anyone listening in, we have a couple of questions that I have left here on the list, but if you have any questions, any, sort of comments on what has been said so far, please feel free to drop those questions on the chat or the Q&A, and we'll tackle them towards the end of the session. We still have another 25 minutes or so, so we're doing well with time. Let's look now at the, Internet of Things and all of these interconnected devices that we have these days. Ed, if you can get us started with this one. With the rise of interconnected devices on the Internet of Things, what security implications should businesses be mindful of, and how can they mitigate potential risks associated with IoT adoption?
Well, one of the biggest things about Internet of Things devices is that they have generally prioritized ease of connectivity over security. Okay. Frequently, you will have the need, it's the child's play, unfortunately, to hack a baby monitor. Why are baby monitors so easy to hack? Because you've got new parents and they're trying to connect these things and they just want to make sure they work. Right. And before, people thought, who really wants to watch my baby sleeping? Why does this need to be so secure? But of course, if someone has a picture of your baby sleeping up on the web, it's super creepy. So that issue is something where companies have pushed out very quickly in this area and prioritized connectivity and ease of use over security. Similarly, you often have hidden third parties in your IoT device, because you have someone who is making, a big dumb metal box that refrigerated food, but now they need to sell a smart refrigerator.
Right.
Well, the people who've been making big dumb metal, well-insulated boxes for years don't suddenly become electronics companies. They go reach out and they grab some off-the-shelf electronics from a third-party company. And that third party is then storing that information elsewhere. Your connected car, thankfully my car is connected enough for this webinar, has a contract with a cell phone carrier sitting inside the car. So you may have your contract with one company, but in fact there's a cell phone carrier, and that carrier has a whole bunch of information from your car as well. Now, in the context of connected cars, I think people are so concerned about hacking of cars and control of cars that that's more secure. But if you're talking about microwaves, refrigerators, cameras, microphones within office buildings, you can have a large number of devices that provide entryways in. And you can see, well, how, really is this an actual concern? One of the big casino hacks wound up being hacked because of their connected fish tank. Target was hacked because of their connection to their HVAC vendor. The connection of all these peripheral devices in is one of the core vulnerabilities. It's you could say it's third-party risk management, but to consider it to be third-party risk management kind of puts it in the idea of, well, that's the other guy's risk, and I can just defend it by contract. A lot of, and if data, because you're introducing new devices into your network, people need to really probe on who's getting access to the camera feed. I mean, just Ring cameras. A lot of people didn't realize that Ring was also, providing information to police. Now, there's been a lot of PR about that, but yes, Ring also had a copy of your Ring camera. That's how they provided it to you. And so if they got a request directly from the police, fine. Right. Now, some people have, it's a civil liberties issue more than a cybersecurity issue, but the reality is that these third parties have significant amounts of your data.
That makes perfect sense. Colleen, anything to add there?
Yeah, I'll pick up on something that Ed just noted. If a company has been making, boxed whatever for 80 years and now is shifting to create connected devices, perhaps it just goes out to a third-party software company to create, a smart something. Or maybe it hires a couple developers in-house and creates that program. That is a moment of momentous change for the company. They are converting to a digital strategy. And in terms of risk, that transformation is something that needs to also, be considered for the transformation of its regulatory practice, because with IoT, there's cyber management, cyber risk management changes that are fairly fundamental from when you were creating a dumb product to a smart product. There's also going to be new data flows, so your privacy program needs to fundamentally change. And I'm sure lots of other things too are changing. The way, the marketing department will change. Usually these are actually pretty transformative for the business strategy when they go digital. And you see these companies actually stop thinking of themselves as a manufacturing business and start thinking of themselves actually as a technology business. And the risks and the governance challenges of a technology business is different from just a manufacturing business. So that's an exciting time and requires a lot of thought and focus and governance, risk and compliance. I will also note that, IoT devices present a harder challenge for patch management. They're still connected to the internet, but oftentimes a lot of the component parts, they end up sticking around longer. Sometimes they can end of life longer. These are things, especially in the industrial Internet of Things, they age longer. And so they can kind of accrue more vulnerabilities over time that require a more sophisticated vulnerability management process. There's that piece of it to challenge as an IoT provider or a user of IoT products in your business. And then finally, asset management for any company that uses IoT devices, asset management for any IoT device is important. Where are my employees' computers? Are we tracking them really well? But when you add connected devices, that's also really important because any connected device connected to the internet could impact your cyber risk. You want to know where all your endpoints are. Mm-hmm. So you add vulnerability management to asset management. Those are two actually, key challenges for an information security department's risk management, and you're combining them into one thing.
That makes sense. Thank you, Colleen. Final reminder to everyone listening in, if you have any questions, now is your chance to drop those in the chat or the Q&A. We have another 20 minutes or so. I have one question and then sort of a final remark question before we wrap up. So the final question, and Colleen can get us started with this one. As regulatory frameworks evolve, how should businesses navigate compliance requirements in the cybersecurity landscape of 2024? And what strategies can they implement to ensure data protection and privacy compliance?
So, governance is really the name of the game in 2024. And you see that coming out in the newest cybersecurity laws and regulations. So, for example, last year, the SEC finalized the new public company cybersecurity disclosure rules. And they require public companies to provide more information than they ever had to before about governance of cybersecurity risk. Frankly, it requires more disclosure around the governance of cyber risk than about any other risk that public companies manage, which is saying a lot. That's really noteworthy. If you look at the New York State Department of Financial Services updated cybersecurity regulations, that also key focus on governance there. This is seen across a host of laws. Frankly, even in the EU with the Cyber Resilience Act, if you look at the EU's AI Act, if you look at elements that are coming out from the CPRA regulations that are, working to get implemented, these state laws that are cropping up across the United States, where there's kind of risk assessments, impact assessment requirements. All of these are elements of governance. Risk management and governance is a key point to manage. And that's important when you have a legal landscape that is evolving at this whiplash speed from multiple levels. We have international laws getting passed and international regulations, especially in Europe, just an absolute alphabet soup of data and digital regulation being passed. And at the federal level in the United States, so many different regulators who are data and cyber risk regulators in their own spheres. And then in the absence of an omnibus federal privacy law or an omnibus federal AI law, you have states taking action all over the place, and all of those state laws are not perfectly consistent. And also, to ensure that there's movement, you have executive orders. Of course, President Biden's AI executive order, which is already incredibly impactful. You even have executive orders at the state level with the Virginia governor issuing an AI executive order. And so the challenge for companies that have especially global data flows is how to stay on top of all of those developments. And governance is the way to do it, creating sort of a best practice program to anticipate these changes, trying to keep your program moving forward in a reasonable way, automating what you can. And I'll also add that it really helps to have good cybersecurity counsel that you can call upon, not just when you have a data breach, but as a part of your sort of, regular counseling as you mature your program.
That makes sense. Ed, your take on this?
My sense is governance is absolutely right as one of the key solutions here. But I want to make sure that we're looking at a couple of the mega trends that we are seeing right now. One of these is that we have regulators at the Federal Trade Commission, the Securities Exchange Commission, the CFPB, who are particularly focused on getting the attention of corporation and corporate officials. Now gone down this pathway of every time there's a breach, looking for responsible individuals. And this piece is crucial because it sets up a lot of dynamics internally that can, if you don't watch it, break apart the team, because people start becoming worried about themselves as opposed to worried about the company and the team. We've seen the CISO at Uber be hit with charges of obstruction and misprision of a felony, something extremely rarely charged. Now, the CISO of Uber, if the facts are as the jury found, and then maybe there was some, bad action there in terms of actually trying to conceal something. But now we see in the SolarWinds with the CISO there, where there's no real allegation of any wrongful action, morally wrongful action. It's more about controls. And that idea that someone could face that sort of personal liability in the past has been remote. The Federal Trade Commission's gone after executives in the past, but usually only with companies that were pretty close to scam companies. But now we have this action against a company that is very well respected manufacturer of very extremely valuable and useful software, and that piece is something that is quite different, because one of the things that the SEC brings to the table is they bring the potential for a lifetime ban that can stop someone from being an officer or director of a public company. And, at the end of the day, a lot of directors of public companies, a lot of officers get comfortable that, okay, we have insurance. So fine, name me in the lawsuit, I'm on the policy, and as long as I've made sure we have enough insurance, that's going to be fine. But this personal ban is not something you can insure against. And also the incredibly disruptive effects of these sorts of actions are not something you can really insure against. The business disruption of having the C-suite. Back in the day, I worked at the White House back in the Clinton administration, and one of the main tactics used against the White House was to keep going after it with frivolous investigation after frivolous leadership. And, you know, I see that as a continuing trend, not to get political. However, you see this again and again where people use attacks again and again and again to distract management. And I think, unfortunately, if you have executives at companies worried about their personal exposure and defending against security, they're taking their eye off the ball. Another thing that is going to be very confusing is the difference in how different countries are approaching cybersecurity. The U.S. has always approached cybersecurity as in part, it kind of grew out of privacy law. It grew out of the protection of personal data. So the U.S. data breach laws started off with this idea of, well, you're owed a notice if your name plus social security name plus credit card has been lost. Now it's moved much further out into protection of supply chains, protection of IP, a broader sense. Mm-hmm. The European Union, although much more, arguably advanced on protection of privacy, has been somewhat asleep at the switch in terms of security. They have woken up and they are trying to catch up very quickly, but they have a framework that's more focused on regulation and working with industry, where we have a focus on punishing industry when they violate. Now, the odd thing is that China, the kind of the third leg of the stool here, is using its data security law, its PIPL, its privacy law, and its cybersecurity law as there's 3 different statutes: a data security law, privacy law, and a cybersecurity law, rights of the nation to control information, the nation state, and using cybersecurity in a much broader strategic sense than we are talking about it in the US or Europe, although they're quite cleverly using the same language as the Europeans. And so people think, oh, this is like GDPR with Chinese aspects. No, it is quite different. And the other big trend we are seeing now in the US is that the plaintiffs' lawyers have smelled the blood in the water. It used to be that if you had a small data breach in the US, by small, I mean, under 100,000, that your odds of actually being hit with a class action lawsuit were relatively rare, because there weren't that many attorneys who were fishing for these suits. They were usually losing them, getting knocked out on standing and lack of damages pretty early on. And so the big class action shops weren't pushing it. Now, with the changes in standing doctrine and some of the circuits, I think that'll be reversed, but we'll have to see. We're seeing more and more cases be brought, even now, for smaller and smaller breaches. I've seen breaches where it's in like 25,000 people, and they're getting hit with a class action, which is amazing, because if you think a lot of these class actions settle for $2, $3, $4 a person. This is a $100,000 class action. Seriously, this is being broadly being pursued because there are so many plaintiffs' lawyers out there, and so having the plaintiffs' lawyers out in force is, I think, driving a dynamic. Because unfortunately, although the regulators care about governance, and I think shareholders should care about governance, the plaintiffs' lawyers just care about the fact of the breach and are essentially advocating for what boils down to a strict liability system. No matter how good you are, if there's a breach, there's a cost to it. And that, I think, is a big trend. If we're actually pushing away from a negligence-based system to a strict liability system, that's going to be a huge trend. And my sense is that we are pushing that way very quickly.
Thank you, Ed. We have one question that just rolled in. I'm going to use this to kind of wrap up the discussion. We're reaching the hour mark. The question that came in is, are there any future areas of risk which cybersecurity lawyers should be preparing their companies or clients for? I know we've discussed many already, but as a summary, sort of, Colleen, you want to get us started with that one?
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about it, but I will just emphasize that the risks around AI is really, we're at the infancy of the transformation of the world with AI. Which is why President Biden, issued the executive order jumping on these issues to ensure that there can be American leadership in this space. It's why the EU, was so intent to ensure that there was, and there is now, the first global, the first comprehensive piece of AI legislation in the world. We don't know exactly how it's going to transform business process and technology and jobs. We have an inkling at this point, but in the face of that, we don't know how it's going to change our competitors. I think a lot of companies are turning to creating governance programs for AI so that they can pivot and they can respond. And when you have to be that nimble to respond to a technology change, being nimble, being fast can introduce risk, can introduce technology, digital, cybersecurity risk. And that is something that has to be watched very closely in a multi-stakeholder way. And the way you do that is through governance structures that bring the right people together, because you need different perspectives to talk about what you're doing, what people are seeing, how things are changing, how you're going to strategize together as a company to respond, as an organization to respond to these changes. And so I think, we're at the beginning of a new dawn with AI, and people really need to prepare to be nimble with that.
Thank you, Colleen. Ed, any sort of final remarks on that question before I say goodbye?
Sure. I think that one of the key things to look at, I just would note three points in closing. One is that the government is changing its attitude on a lot of these things. The FBI, for instance, in particular, has been extremely helpful, and it is working very closely with industry to protect industry and treating industry like the victim of a crime. And when you have companies working closely with the FBI at the same time as you have a particularly aggressive streak in enforcement at the FTC and SEC and CFPB, there's going to be quite a lot of interesting work done by outside counsel. The second point is that the insurance markets are needing to evolve here. A lot of the policies are based upon personal data. What we've been talking about is supply chain, IP, other risks. And frankly, a lot of it is coming from nation state attacks. There was a very interesting case that settled out after years and years of litigation involving Merck when they were hit with a non-Petra attack. And just to make it clear, the non-Petra attack was the first time the Russians went into the Ukraine, when they went into Crimea. And that thing has been in litigation this whole time. If you've ever waited for an insurance payment, consider yourself lucky you have to wait that long. But the policies usually have a nation state exclusion, yet people are most worried about nation state attacks. And so how is to say that one of the best ways to keep up on this is to pay attention to all the free resources that are available. We have the GLG guide coming out that's going to be available to people listening here today. Sidley has a wonderful blog called Data Matters. Ropes has a great blog called Data Files. And several other firms have these blogs out there that provide continual updates. And those are great resources to keep yourself informed by.
Excellent. Well, Colleen, Ed, thank you very much for, sitting here with us for the last hour. Thanks for all of your insight, expertise, knowledge. I'm sure that, everyone who attended probably left with, plenty of food for thought and some good ideas. And hopefully they'll be in touch if they ever need counsel when it comes to cybersecurity matters. Ben, I'm going to hand things over to you to give us some final comments, remarks, and goodbye from me. And thank you.
Thanks, Mateo. Thank you all for a stimulating hour discussing the cybersecurity landscape. I get the impression we could have filled another hour quite easily, but it's good to save something for next time, and probably good to let Ed continue his journey now too. I hope everyone has tuned in today, found the session as interesting, dynamic, and useful as I have. All that's left for me to say is please do keep your eyes open for more from around the ICLG team around our cybersecurity resources. Do take a look at the AGRC and how they can help you further. And of course, if you have any follow-up questions, please do reach out to us. Thanks again, Colleen, Ed, and Mateo. All the best, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
everyone. Bye.